Hello, friends. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the first ever Tactical Urbanism Conference here at Winterruption. We are very excited to present ideas, innovative ideas about how our city can improve, how our lives in the built experience can be more pleasurable for all of us. But first, I'm going to do our acknowledgement here at the Western Cultural Center. We acknowledge that we exist in Treaty 1, the traditional lands of the Dene, Cree, Ojibwe, Ojibwe people, and also the heartland of the Métis Nation. We are proud to present our first panel. I will let everybody introduce themselves, but first, I think Iván de la Lanza, who is our guest of honor from Mexico City, is going to do a presentation to sort of introduce the entire conference, and so that to put us all in the right mind frame. I'll let you carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. So should I go just right now? Right? Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm going to take this out so you can hear me better. My name is Iván de la Lanza. I'm an urban mobility specialist from Mexico City. I live in Mexico City. We have some noise. That was unexpected. I'm very glad to be here in Winnipeg. It's a very beautiful city. Thanks for the invitation. I just want to present some slides with data so we can set up the conversation, and we also have some questions around the panel. So maybe we can bring on the slides here. Okay, so the big question here for this panel is, what does Winnipeg look like? Sorry as well for my English is not my first language, so this is the only one I have, so sorry for the mistakes in my speaking. So what does Winnipeg look like? And for me, and in my experience working with many cities, is how we can create a common vision to more equal cities. So we have a lot of challenge going on right now, like climate change related challenge, specifically urbanization, motorization, congestion, emissions, energy, air quality, and of course, now we have to deal with COVID. And in the future, I think the biggest challenge is that half of the population already lives in cities. So for 2050, we will see an increase of 70% of these people living in cities. So we eventually will have more people living in cities. And of course, these negative externalities associated with private motorized transport and with urbanization will increase as well. So in the way that we are doing things, this will bring more of this challenge in the future. So data also shows that there are technically feasible scenarios to reduce these emissions in cities by 2050. So cities can reduce 90% of their emissions with measures that are technically feasible today. 21% is coming from transport sector, so that's why transport is very important for this. And also transportation contributes up to 70% of the urban population. So for the urban air pollution, I'm sorry. This is very important because this is something that we can relate to climate change in our daily lives. I'm asthmatic because of Mexico City. Mexico City has bring me asthma into my daily life, and this is something that you can feel every day. And also, we can see that research shows that air pollution contributes to a 50% increase on death related from COVID. So this is something that we are also experiment in our daily lives. What are the future scenarios for this? So we know that daily trips in urban areas will increase by 50%, and freight transport is going to increase by 70%. So we have like two scenarios that we can expect at that time. So the first one, of course, is business as usual. This is very negative because it's going to be a negative shift from walking and cycling and transit to more private motorized vehicles. This is already happening in many cities, including Winnipeg. And the second one is transit trips will increase by only only by 30%, while private motorized trips will increase by 80%. So both of these scenario is very negative. The second one is more positive. It's to duplicate the modal share of transit while increase the modal share of walking and cycling, and also keeping the number of trips of private motorized vehicles at the number that we have. And all extra mobility, we need to do it in sustainable modes. So there's a vision for cities in the 2050, which is the 000 vision, which is having zero deaths, zero exclusion, and zero emissions. So note that it's acceptable on the road. This is the Vision Zero approach. It's the safe system approach as well. Zero exclusion is to guarantee equitable access to basic service in cities. We know that not everyone is getting the same access to services in cities, especially education, health, jobs. And emissions, we know that we could avoid by shifting to more sustainable modes. So that's why urban and active mobility is very important. It's a fundamental element for sustainable development. It's a way to provide sustainable and health access to these city services. And it's a way to reduce inequality of access as well. So it's not only around mobility, it's what it brings all in mobility. So this is Mexico City. This is a picture of Mexico City. But this is also as well a picture of Mexico City. So I want to quote an Italian author in the book Invisible Cities. He says, there are two types of cities, the one which through the years and mutations keep on shaping the desires, and those in which the desires achieve to erase the city or are erased by it. So this is around the vision that we create. This is around the desires as a community we can create, and how this vision and these desires can produce a city like this, or a city, a more livable city. So in the case of our cities, since the 1950s, we are experimenting having a vision of having a lot of cars, having a lot of traffic, having like wider streets, and this brings like a very disorganized urbanization. Just for the context as well, but we are 22 million inhabitants in Mexico City. That's a lot of people. It's crazy, to be honest. Just in the center part of the city, we have 9 million, and we have 35 million trips every day. So a lot of people, a lot of trips. This, of course, brings a lot of negative externalities as well. We have $10 billion every year on economic losses because of this time we spend on commuting every day. It's 4 hours average commute by car, and you can ask Jorge how he learned to play the guitar while he was commuting and being on the traffic jam every day in Mexico City. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It's really a very bad situation here. And we can see a lot of people like by car, but actually there are not so many trips. When you see the numbers, you can see that these 35 million trips, 45% are doing by public transit, 32% walking only. This is not good, walking only, because it's not like people have any other choice. It's actually that they need to walk because they can afford public transit. This is the way that we refer how the city is not accessible for all. We have 20% of private vehicles, which mean cars and motorcycles, and only 1% of bicycles, but it was less, actually, in years before. So this is the picture of Mexico City. This is how, from mobility to access for all, how mobility in cities could be a quality index on how people can access to cities services, as we said, from jobs, education, health. And in this map, you can see that in the central zone, there's a green zone where the more wealthiest people lives. Every city is the same. So these people who live in the core, who live in the central area, has 20 times more access to formal jobs, but also has 120 times more access to public health. So that's why the city could be very unequal for everyone. And of course, the people who live in the sprawl areas in Mexico City and in many other cities is not the rich people, it's not the wealthiest people. So we are building cities that are not equal for all. So let's review some data from Winnipeg. So on the urban mobility context, we can see that the population has increased more than 3 times in the past 75 years, but also the size of the city has increased a lot. So this is not good in the way that we need to create cities, right? So we can see, for example, if we compare cities, I don't like to compare cities because each city has like different contexts, but if we compare the cities, we can see that Mexico City area, it's only 3 times larger than Winnipeg, but population is 30 times bigger. So we have less density, and it's also very expensive for government to build the city in that way because you need to take services in a long distance trips. Also, the population needs to commute longer. So we can see as well here that the trips in car has increased a lot since 1966, from 68 to 78% from the private car, and we lost actually trips on public transit and walking and cycling. So actually, it used to be like very, very high. 12% is very high for a city. But now it's 70% only. Most of them are on walking trips. And in the future, of course, we know that this situation and the geopolitical situation that we are living now with the World War III, it's going to complex all these negative externalities. So a lot of people is going to, this already happened in the World War II, and that's why Copenhagen and other countries like Holland has been turned into the bicycle because they have this rise on the petrol prices, and they need to find new alternatives. So I don't think that we need to get into this worst case scenario. We can shift now, we can do and provide more sustainable transportation aspects. I'm already finishing. So just to review, according to the Transportation Master Plan, all this data that I'm talking about this on the Transportation Master Plan 2050 from the government. So they asked Winnipeggers what are the key issues in Winnipeg. They said like climate change, traffic congestion, safety, city finances. Also what the people want. That said, it's very interesting because it's actually polarized. In one side they said better maintained roads and fewer potholes. I can see a lot of, I have been walking around the city in the past days, and I can see a lot of like maintenance all the time. Of course, of the winter time is very hard, but also want effective expressways. And in the other side, there's other people who want more and better bike infrastructure, better bus services. So I'm going to leave it like here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ivan. Can you hear? My name is Shauna Mackinnon. I'm the chair and a professor in the Department of Urban and Inner-Cities Studies at the University of Winnipeg. And our department is located on Selkirk Avenue at Merchants Corner, which I believe is really at the heart of the core of the city as well. And I'll let the other two introduce themselves, and then we're just going to have a kind of a conversation about some of the things that Yvonne raised, as well as some of the other issues that we're seeing in the city. So go ahead, Aurora.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Oh, the thing might not be on. I'll try and speak loudly, but my name's Aurora. I'm with the West End Biz, so I'm their communications and marketing coordinator. I've been with the Biz for almost 3 years now, and so I've really gotten to know the West End area and just different ways that our organization can help build a better community and neighborhood for everyone. So I'm very excited to be here today.
My name is Darcy Adaman, the founder and CEO of Make Music Matter, and the occasional producer still.
Thanks, Darcy and Aurora. So Yvonne gave a great little overview of some of the issues that we're all facing in urban centers and otherwise. So I'm just going to open up, to a couple of questions. The first one is, Yvonne talked about the difference in the size of our two cities. So very different sizes, 22 million compared to about 700,000. And so I'm just curious if the panelists have any thoughts on how we compare to other cities of similar size that they've visited around the world, and what they've seen in terms of vibrancy, diversity, lifestyle, inclusivity, those sorts of things.
Well, I had some thoughts, and then given the presentation and then your question, it caused me to pivot and think of other experiences. So comparing, I think it's about its cultural inclusivity and just functionality. So I normally spend a lot of time traveling. I spend a lot of time in various parts of Africa, New York, Toronto, and Europe. And if I'm in Winnipeg and I live in the Exchange, I have no problems walking within the community. It's kind of like a little village inside. But it doesn't take much to go beyond those borders to go, maybe I take the car for that. But if I'm in Toronto, that distance is greater. If I'm in New York, it's almost always, I'm walking it. I don't care how far it is. It's just the best way to get around. And again, I think it's about the inclusivity of the culture. So in the Exchange District downtown where I live, at least for the inhabitants, it is very welcome. It's built for us. It's fancy cafes and coffee shops and restaurants, but it does sort of push out and intimidate the homeless population there. But comparing to a similar size, I've noticed, last time I was in Brussels, which was a little while ago, similar in terms of population, but culturally, bikes are used all the time. I learned that the hard way. There's a sidewalk with bricks with two different color bricks. One side is bikes, one side's for walking, and I learned that the hard way, almost getting run down by a school of bikes. And we just don't, have that here. I know that's partially, the climate and the weather, but I think it's also the design of the city. Your presentation really gave me pause because I'm looking at the population growth, which is, it's grown a bit, but look at the development that's happening around the city. It's not, a little bit is happening in the downtown core, but we're getting pushed out and these new suburbs are being created all the time. And you have no choice but to, again, either afford a car or not participate in life here. And I've always honestly wondered why the city is doing that instead of developing more of the downtown core, which is hollowing out and making people reticent to live there. I have a feeling it's something to do with property taxes and the city wanting to get their coffers full with higher property taxes with the suburban house than downtown. I'm not an expert in that, but I think it's really unfortunate that way because the Exchange downtown is a beautiful, functioning little place where again we just walk everywhere and it's normal. But it doesn't take long to go past those boundaries where we don't feel welcome to walk somewhere.
Thanks, Darcy. Did you have anything to add to that, Aurora?
Yeah, I think just reflecting on kind of how the West End is set up, especially the core of the West End, it does actually have quite a few of those very desirable neighborhood feels. There's a lot of businesses that are very close by. You've got your grocery store, you've got your pharmacies, you've got your hairstylists that are all very walkable, which is, we can see that in our numbers that from the West End, there's actually a higher percentage of folks that walk and bike compared to the rest of the city. So Ivan, I think, said it was 7% that walk and bike in all of Winnipeg, and in the West End it's actually 12%. Same with transit use as well. And so I think just, looking at areas that maybe are working well, such as the Exchange, looking at the West End, those more dense neighborhoods that things are more accessible, that folks can choose other modes of transportation, are really important to then see why that's working, why people like that, and then enhance that even further throughout the city is really important. Yeah.
And sorry, I'm going to. I think it's also a practice. I was really impressed and struck by just walking up here and seeing the sign on the door about sort of open public hours. And that never used to happen down here back when I was much younger. And I think that's a huge thing in making people, feel welcome. Years ago, I, along with Jorge, produced a documentary for the University of Winnipeg when Dr. Axworthy was running the university, and he had to physically tear down walls, literally tear down walls to make people feel more, for the neighborhood to feel like it was a part of it, like it was a part of them as well. So even a simple thing like that, I think was incredible.
Yvonne, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a very quick idea that the way that we move and the way that we live also influence the community engagement that we have. So there are several studies that shows that if we have more barriers between each others, if we live more separately, we also do not create more community. If we are more dense, if we live in a 15-minute city, which is an urban concept of living around and getting everything closer by walking or cycling, we also create a very community. We also share the ideas, say hi to the neighborhoods. We engage from each other. So this is very, very important, not only in an urban mobility concept, but as well in a community concept.
Yeah, one of the challenges you brought up, well, both of you have raised, and you alluded to this as well, Aurora, was the situation in our city is that we've got a lot of space, so we grow out. And why is that? And you've raised some of the reasons. I think it's more profitable for developers to develop that way. And it's also the case that people want to live out in those communities, right? And so what can we do to change that way of thinking? And it's nothing new, right? This has constantly been the challenge. And so this hollowing out of the downtown, the kind of the core, the north end, has been a problem for a very long time here. But it is partly because we can spread out. And so there's pressure on city officials, government officials, to give people what they want, and they want to move into those neighborhoods. I don't live in those neighborhoods, but a little while ago I had to deliver something to a colleague who lives out in Sage Creek. And I don't know if anybody's been out to that area of the city. I had never been out there. I was completely flabbergasted by this community, which is essentially this sort of self-contained community. They never have to leave, and so those people never have to come to the core. Many of them are afraid to come to the core. And then now with COVID, because you talked about we've got this whole new context with the pandemic as things as we settle into that, increasingly people are going to want to stay at home and work from home, and that means they're in those neighborhoods, and perhaps in the past they came downtown to work and then went back, and now they don't have to. So I think it's like there are a lot of implications for the city and how we grow. We want to grow, more density, but the pressure, I think, is going to continue to be growing out, and so we need to grapple with those kinds of issues. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts about that.
No, I think it's a great point, and it's so funny. Like, still to this day, if I'm talking to a family member I don't see very often, like once a year at Christmas or whatever the case is, and the number one thing they ask me first when I say, I live in the Exchange is, do you go out at night? Like, I'm not exaggerating. It happens constantly. Like, are you kidding? Of course it's okay, but that's the perception. And that, again, that inclusivity is a practice. So I think there is that push and pull of it's hollowing out, but there's some great development. And if it makes up the cultural fabric, participate in it. Like, I love my little place in the Exchange. It's great. There's a lot of homeless there. Get to know them. Treat them the same as a human being, get to know their names and all that, and you'll be completely fine. It's just, we have to take those leaps.
Thanks. Did you want to add to that, Aurora?
Well, I think just kind of going off your point about, the downtown hollowing out and stuff, and I think the pandemic definitely highlighted the consequences if we only have a downtown that folks are working in, and that we really need both folks working and living in the downtown. We definitely saw that the West End, the businesses in the West End, really were fortunate for the large residential support that they have. And, talking about the 15-minute city, we need that 15-minute city to then help, make these businesses survive. We can't just be relying on people coming down for the day and then leaving at night. And I think by creating, denser neighborhoods and an area that people work, play, and live, it really will benefit everyone from business owners to the residents that live there.
Yeah, good point, Aurora. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to add a very simple idea, which is, this is anybody's fault. I mean, this is not like the green fault to say like, oh my God, I'm just doing the wrong thing. No, this is the idea to think how public policy is addressing these problems and these challenges, and how public policy that we created as a citizens, we need to involve to public policy to see if the public policy is working or not, if we need to change it, if we need to doing something different. Because if we don't involve with public policy, of course, the public policy will keep the business as usual, but this in the 2050 is gonna be crazy. And the second thing is, as I say it, I don't like to compare cities, but the only thing I wanna say is that Winnipeg has a great opportunity to grow sustainable, to grow better, to grow with a strong community, because it's already like in a very good stage of growing, and it's not that big. In Mexico City, all the public policy that we need to implement are corrective public policy, because we are like somebody with a very bad health disease, because we are 23 millions. I mean, there's not so much way to do that, to implement new public policies that it's only corrective thing. So that's the only comparison I want to say, that you have great opportunities in the future.
Thanks, Ivan. That's a good point. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about what your thoughts are around how we dedicate our space. So how much of our space do you think we dedicate to pedestrians? So, the walkability of the space. How much is dedicated to cars? I mean, some of the priorities that were raised in the 2050 was about, in expressways and things, improving those, which again, sort of gives you an idea of the mindset of a lot of people that, they want to drive, right? So this is an issue. So how much are we dedicating to that? How much do we dedicate to green space? Is that enough? Where is that green space? And then also how much do we dedicate to cycling, and where are those cycle routes? Because that actually is quite telling as well, if you look at where the cycle routes are. So just curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, we definitely hear, we advocate on behalf of businesses, so we hear a lot of, we need more parking, how are my customers going to get here? A bike lane, that can feel very scary, I think, to a lot of businesses, because that's maybe taking away parking. And so I think it's really important, as we're, moving towards net zero, and these changes need to be made, is making sure we're not just, throwing in a bike lane wherever a bike lane seems nice, and just a bit more education and understanding of why we need to do these shifts, and that, there might be a transition period where things will seem a little, a little alarming that your parking spot's taken away, but we need to be making these shifts over time to create a more sustainable city for everyone. And I think it's important that we're, including all of these voices from, businesses to advocacy groups to the residents, and just making sure everyone's included in those conversations of what they want their neighborhood to look like, and how we can get there in a sustainable fashion is really important for sure.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we do have competing interests, and so how do we balance those so that people are, getting what they need, because, there are different needs. Did you have any thoughts on that, Darcy?
The only thing I'll add to that is just, I think it's the functionality of our public transportation system, because it's kind of well, again, I'm going to throw the word culture out a lot, but culturally in Winnipeg, you're 15 and a half, you get your first car, and that's how it goes. But, again, if our public transportation system was a little better, I think more people would use it. So, again, case in point in New York, everyone takes the subway. It's the great equalizer. the poorest to the most, you'll find celebrities on there. Everyone does it, and it's acceptable because it functions well, and it's the best option. If we had something, similar, I don't think we could do a subway here, but in terms of public transportation, we had something similar which trumped the idea of your own car. I think that would do a lot. But again, it would take time. Like all these shifts definitely do take time.
Ivan?
Yeah, so the data for the cities shows that 80% of the public space is designated to roads, and only 20% is designated to other things like parks, including parks, but also sidewalks. So that's very unequitable as well, because here, for example, we have a huge number of car trips, almost 80%, 70% we said. But in many other different cities, especially in the global south, the mobility is completely backwards. So most of the people actually rely on walking and cycling because they can afford other way of transportation. So that's why also it's very needed to increase the public space on the sidewalks and on the cycle lanes, because people need, especially vulnerable people, need a lot to rely on this. They have no other option. And of course, public transit. In the case of Mexico City, for 35 million trips every day, we need 12 lines of metro, 12. It's huge. You can move around the city like everywhere. And it is very cheap, and it's subsidized in 80% of the cost because people need it. People cannot afford. If we don't have this subsidized, the development of the city will go down very quick because we need to provide access to people.
Yeah, it's a challenge, though. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing here. I mean, because, I think we would all agree that we need a much, more robust public transit system that's accessible. And as you point out, it's an equalizer when everybody's using public transit. But again, we have this culture here of driving, and it's easier to get around. So where do you start? And partly it's, where's the leadership, right? This could be changed if we had the leadership and the will of our politicians to put policies in place that in some regard make it difficult for people to drive, right? Like if you want people to come downtown, but if you put in place a public infrastructure so that people could get downtown and have less, utilizing less space, land space for parking, like all those things need to happen. But there's so much pressure, right, to go in the other direction. And I think our elected officials, unfortunately, they gravitate towards that because that's where they see their votes, I think. Yes. My cynicism is showing, but yeah, anybody have any thoughts?
No, and then that creates more and more separation of us and them.
Yes, exactly.
And then empathy starts to go away between it.
The first step on this is to create a vision. That's why I was talking, to create a vision, because once you are living in this way, it's very hard to think in another way because you don't have the chance to experience in another way. So you only think that you can live in this way. So create a vision, and that's the whole point for me and my experience working in Mexico City government. I used to work as a bicycle mobility manager. So 15 years ago, to think about bicycle mobility in Mexico City was crazy. It was like, no, it is very dangerous. It was, of course, more dangerous than here and in many other cities. So everybody says, like, no, you are crazy. You guys are crazy, because we were a bunch of teams, a specific team in Mexico City government. So we make studies, we develop studies with university, everything. We implement public policy around bicycles, and it brings an increase of bicycle trip. Of course, it was only in the central zone of the city, but it creates a different vision. So it changed the mind, and it says like, oh, maybe we can live differently. Maybe we can do changes. So creating a new vision, it's the first step to change public policy from political will to public policy. Political will is created by people and citizens who says, we want to change, we want different things. But if we don't create this vision, it's going to be very hard to change the policies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of this idea of mobilizing around the right to the city, but who's right to the city, and how we engage people and mobilize from the ground up. Aurora?
Yeah, and I think a good example of that is the open streets that were implemented
Yes,
in Winnipeg during COVID, and that gave people, a really good opportunity to see kind of a very different vision of what Winnipeg could look like, of maybe sharing the streets more and having these streets safe, to have your kids learn how to bike on these streets, go for walks on these streets. And like you're saying, once it's implemented, it's very hard to take that away from folks once they know this is a really nice thing. I don't want this to disappear. And so I think having that vision and, we can achieve these things just with some political will is, yeah, it's great.
That's a really good example. I was thinking about that as well. But it was also the case that there was some resistance to that. So you had on Wellington Crescent, for
Yes,
some
yeah.
strange reason, some folks who lived there wanted the streets opened up. And then, of course, I know in Wolseley, they, there were people barreling through in their cars. I think somebody got hit. Anyway, so there was
Yeah.
there's all this resistance to
Yeah.
that. But once you kind of get there and push it and more folks embrace it, at least you're getting in that, going in that direction, and that's when you get the public, or the political support, right? It's the will has to come from the ground, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're gonna go ahead.
No.
It's also a way that the magical change that I can see around bicycle mobility and Mexico City is that it was a way to practice policy in a citizen way. So it creates groups, and I have seen this in many cities because this is my work in every city. I have seen this creation in every city in Latin America, in Europe, in India, in China. So it begins with groups of people, and it could be bicycle, but it could be another thing as well. It creates how we can create politics. So it creates a group of people interested in something. It could be bicycle. And then it creates community, start to engage each other, start to talk around not only bicycles, but as well environmental, water, food management, whatever. And then it starts to create a vision of the city and start to link to politics and start to create public policy. So that's the way, that's a very interesting for me, see how these processes happen in every city. And the second thing I wanted to say is that the first step of the bicycle mobility policy in Mexico City was actually the Open Street program. Yeah. And the Open Street programs came from Bogota in the 1960s as an activism movement from the bicyclists there. And they said, we need to show and to demonstrate how the street and the road could be used in a different way for the people. So in the case of Mexico, we are now having 55 kilometers every Sunday, and it comes 55,000 attendees every Sunday. So it's a public policy that people just embrace and says like, no, this is going to stay for a long time.
Oh, that's interesting, thanks. I'm curious about what people are thinking about cycling, the cycling routes. I'm just fascinated by it because what I've kind of been observing myself, I don't know what other people see, I feel like we're developing these really great, so some of it's good, like you see it downtown and in the urban areas. Again, where our department is functions in the North End on Selkirk, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. You cannot get across those bridges without putting your life in danger on a bicycle. So it's really a problem that we're not, what we're doing around transportation in that regard is really failing the most excluded folks. But what also seems to be happening is a lot of the cycling infrastructure seems to be developing around recreation more than actual, transportation. So if you look at those little pockets, as I was talking about, like Sage Creek, the other one is Bridgewater. Oh my goodness, like amazing cycling routes out in those areas, sort of at White Ridge and that. But it's really all around, recreation, really, rather than the transportation to the course. So I think there's some improvements, but we have a long way to go, I think. And we need to look at it in a very different way that's stressing exclusion of a lot of folks. I don't know if others have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, like even just when you look at some of the surveys that the city puts out and what the results are in that, you can or go to any of those kind of open houses to learn more about these programs, you can definitely tell that there's, the folks that do this as a way of commuting, and then there's folks that do this as recreation.
Right, yeah.
And, even within neighborhoods, some folks are really all for the bike lanes in their neighborhoods, but some folks would rather, that be a bit outside of the neighborhood that you can use for recreational use, nice walking, biking paths, maybe along the river. And so I think it's a balancing act of how far do you go on each side, and making sure, though, that, if biking is a mode of transportation, that does need to be looked at seriously, because we don't want to exclude those folks either. And but you also want, really nice, we have beautiful rivers, we've got lovely neighborhoods that, shared walking, cycling paths are also a really great way to enhance a neighborhood. So I think just finding that balance is, in Winnipeg, is especially difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, what else? What are we talked a little bit about this in terms of, really it is a function of how do we get political will really to make some of this stuff happen. So just curious if you have any more thoughts on that, as how do we actually get there?
The experience in other cities is actually recreational cycling and daily cycling is not against each other. It could be very, very related, because actually the people from recreational cycling can help the people who actually commute day by day by cycling, and it can become into a really daily commute cyclist. That's what eventually happens in every city, and that's what eventually also gives a lot of strength to the political will and to take the attention of the politicians, because of course the people who actually live and commute by cycling in most of the countries is the people more vulnerable, is the poorest people, is the people who has no voice in political will and in public policy. So that's what is so fascinating, the whole social process on that, and why bicycle is happening in around many cities and bringing like different change and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and we still there's always the small caveat of we're a winter city no matter what. So there's a bit of an issue with that. We have very long winters, but when you talk about political will, well, leaders should lead. And again, I give the example of last time I was in Brussels and literally watching members of European Parliament bicycling with their suits to Parliament to vote on big things. Would that ever happen here? Probably not.
We actually did have a premier who cycled to the ledge all the time.
Sorry?
We did actually have a premier at one time who cycled to the ledge all the time, yeah.
But it's a rare occurrence.
Yeah, it is rare.
And I just think we accept things as, well, I would never, I'm lesser than if I take my bicycle to that. I need to, take my car.
I think
for
also
sure.
with public transit, that's another, we need our leaders to be advocating and to be, showing that this is a great form of transportation. This is something that everyone can use. It's not just for folks that can't afford a car.
Yeah.
It can actually be a more convenient way of getting somewhere.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. But it is that case that, I ride my bike all the time, weather permitting. I'm not going to ever going to be one of those people who ride my bike to work in the winter. And I think that's probably, most of us. So that, the public transportation is really the thing that needs to be strengthened in that regard. And again, recognizing that for some people, you talk about, people with small children needing to commute, that they're not, cycling is not the answer for everybody, but it needs to be part of the sustainable transportation plan for sure.
And
go
it
ahead.
will take time too. I've heard, yes, what you mentioned, when you put up the bike lanes, there's half the people like it, half complain about the parking, and whenever, usually it's a family member that complains about, I've lost parking. I keep reminding, well, these shifts take time. Give it 5-10 years and it'll be an accepted thing of, oh, it's cool to ride my bike.
And finding different ways to address some of the challenges. So, for example, I think it's really great, in the exchange, they often, will have the, oh, sorry, I don't think of what they're called, but where you can just drop off your valet, bike valet. Like those are the kinds of things that encourage people as well, because people are, worried. They know, oh, this is easy. I can just drop my bike off, and then pick it up. And, lots of folks, I think, are riding their bikes to places like the Exchange, going to the Forks, because it really is, it is becoming easier because of the increase in infrastructure. It's just how do we move that beyond to support folks who are excluded, because it kind of is a middle class thing.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially when you link the bicycle with intermodal trips with transit, it's just the perfect way to move in a city, because you can, access to the first and last mile or kilometer. We have the experience as well on public bike sharing. So it's a system that provides accessibility to people for bicycles to get into public transit or final destination. And it's very, very convenient. The thing is that most of the cities are more focused into providing more Uber trips or helping these companies than providing a bike sharing system in cities. So again, it's how the political will and the public policy is going in our cities and how we need to manage that in order to achieve the way that we want to live.
Yeah, for sure. And we do have an election coming up here in the fall, so all important things to look at, encouraging folks who are running, and to put the pressure on, but also to consider why is it that we're not. I mean, and this is not just here, right? This issue of leadership that we like, because it's people respond to the polls, and we don't really see a lot of really strong leadership. In these issues, I think, or else we might see leadership while people are running for office, but once they're in, it goes out the window. So I don't know, how do we also need to think about how we kind of, keep them accountable to their promises. I'm not sure how much more time we have. It's about 10 to. Does anybody have anything else you want to add? I think we've got till noon. You want to just maybe go end with any thoughts that you might have?
Yeah, just for me, it's the way that we need to involve in politics. Actually, it begins with these kind of things, with involving into our core, our neighborhood, the sidewalks, the road safety, our day-to-day issues actually creates politics. That's politics. Politics is not going and vote for someone that you don't even know and who promise bigger things. I mean, of course, some of us that are linked to politics or linked to working with cities, we follow up the statistics and the development of the public policies. But for a day-to-day, creating politics is to get into our day-to-day issues.
Yeah, good point. So I'm told I'm supposed to open this up to questions now. So there's a microphone here. If anybody has any questions they want to come up and ask, or comments. I see somebody's making their way up.
Hello. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a couple. I really appreciated all of that. I thought it was really interesting to see, hi Shauna, to see how it's almost the opposite, in Winnipeg, I don't need the mic at all. In Winnipeg, it's more impoverished people live in the center and more affluent people have that. So, oh no, I'm good.
I think, they want you to probably.
Okay. Is that working?
Yeah, no.
Okay, good. Okay, I get it. Sorry. My question was, I know in order to be able to encourage they who live outside to want to participate in public transit and everything, there needs to be incentive, obviously, because a lot of Winnipeggers identify with their car. Has there been any sort of idea in incentivizing motorists to replace that? Is there ways to encourage motorists to maybe switch from investing $600 a month on their car to investing that money in public transit as a transit co-op, or what kind of, how do you sell that to people who are on the fence or not sure.
Yeah, good question. Ivan, do you have any ideas about that from
Yeah,
your?
they usually call this like the push and pull policy, which is having restrictions in order to prevent public health or damage. For example, now we have the low emission zones in many countries and cities because we have a lot of emissions, especially for bigger cities like Mexico City or others. So they have low emission zones because we have like very old vehicles circulating and we can not afford that because of the public health of everyone. But in the same way, we need to have the pool solution, which is, okay, I'm going to restrict the circulation of the cars in this area, but as well, I'm going to link with public transport, which needs to be reliable, with a good quality of service. So, okay, I'm going to restrict you in this way, but I'm going to provide a solution as well. So it's called the pull and pull policy, and eventually, with all the political will that we are talking about, it gets better results.
I think maybe to add to that as well, like looking at ways to kind of have that first introduction maybe that they're not used to. So I know even with Jets games and Blue Bombers games, a lot of folks are coming downtown for those events, and that's a good way to kind of incentivize folks. You won't have to find parking. You can have a drink and you won't have to drive home. It will be quicker. You can be with your friends, and finding ways to work with these large events or things going on in the city, that it's actually a lot more convenient to take a bus than it is to bring your car downtown. And once that maybe introduction has started, then we can find other ways to kind of build off of that and hopefully, bring some more folks in.
So you could do like a transit advertisement showing like a bunch of Jets bros in the back of a bus hanging out, being like, "Nice game, guys," or something like that to like.
Yeah, totally. Or like even, the city could look into working with the actual like True North, for instance, and maybe having a free bus that just brings folks from Charleswood to downtown.
Yeah, the Red River X bus. Like,
Yeah,
why not?
and like that could be a great way to kind of build those partnerships that, I think would be super helpful for folks.
It's a good idea, because then it also keeps people staying downtown after those games, go to a restaurant, go have some drinks, not have to worry about driving, rather than just, leaving the game, getting back to their car and going back to wherever they came from. Do they not? They do something like that to go to Bombers games, don't they? I mean, I don't go to Bombers games, but don't they have buses that people bus out there, which is kind of interesting. We're busing people in that direction. Why aren't we busing them in the other direction to go to those sorts of activities? Yeah. Anybody else?
Case in point, I think the city is small enough where we could become early adopters of this stuff. So in the last few years, especially in the summers, I have noticed, at least with my neighbors in my building, the idea of using sort of co-op vehicles. They don't own a vehicle, but once every 2 weeks, they have to do the Costco shop, whatever they call it. They do their errands in a day. And also the same neighbors are taking that public bus to the Bomber games. And I've seen that uptick, especially the last 2-3 years. But that being said, I remember being in Delaware 20 years ago and Zipcar was around and accepted. And that was honestly 20 years ago. It really took a long time for us to come around to those things.
Yeah, that's a good example. Did anybody else have any questions or comments?
Hi. Oh, that's on. Okay, good. So, I heard some mention of car culture. And when I think of car culture in Winnipeg, I picture the Sunday cruise, nights. So there's, a few hundred people that'll get together, to drive their cars. The hobbyists, the enthusiasts, like car culture, people who want to, like, they fix their cars, they mod them, it's enjoyable, like that's car culture. A few hundred people. But I look at also, if you think of bike culture, I also see that, when we have a bike jam, and we're having one this weekend, that's also a few hundred people. So I think actually the car culture and the bike culture are the same size in the city. So when we talk about car culture, it's not as if it's this, omnipresent, ubiquitous thing that's everywhere. It's actually real, like the culture is actually really small. People make choices to drive their car. It's not, you know, one of my favorite things to read in Winnipeg is the Dear Winnipeg blog. And one of the lines there I'm paraphrasing is, there's no such thing as car culture, just car policy. So I really don't think that we have much car culture in Winnipeg. We just have a lot of car policy. I'm wondering if you'd want to comment on that.
It's interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Ivan.
I would like to comment that we need to recognize, I think, that the car industry has been done a great work since the last 50, 60 years. I mean, they created this car culture-oriented development in every city, and it really, the public policies has been following the car-oriented development, we call it. They also create this vision around the fancy status of the car, which is very classistic and very, it even has like racist context. So in many countries, especially developing countries, it's associated with healthy, with rich, with different things which are not actually. So when I was in Copenhagen 2 years ago, they said that one of the most important things in Denmark is that actually they don't have so much car industry. We need to recognize in North America, Mexico, United States, Canada, that we have a very huge industry that creates a huge car culture, which is very difficult to fight. So they said they have this advantage in Denmark. I guess they already have. But we need to fight it not only with public policy, but as well with communication, with engagement, with the bike jams. We are actually trying to planning, Jorge and I, for everyone who is interested tomorrow to have a bike jam. Because bike jams are these. The bike jams are demonstrations, public demonstrations while you are having fun, you are making friends, you are making community. So that's a very interesting point to discuss.
I think also, like, it's interesting to think about, I don't necessarily would call it car culture, but in my head it's very car dependent. I think a lot of folks feel very dependent on their car, and if that's taken away, it almost feels like your freedom is taken away, when in reality it's, you're so dependent on a vehicle that you don't feel like you have access maybe to these things. And I think that goes to what Yvonne's saying, is that by building cities that, you know, things are 15 minutes away and everything is accessible, you probably won't feel like you're missing out, or that something, you don't have access to these things anymore if you don't have a car. And I think that's something that's not really discussed as much as how, you know, I think you're right that the car, they do a very good job of marketing this as, you know, this is your freedom, this is your ticket out, that you have access to all of these things with the car. When in reality, okay, but what happens when gas prices go up? Or what happens when my car breaks down? And you know, realizing that that's a huge marketing thing that car companies do, of course, just like any other company. And that we need to maybe start reflecting on, why are we so dependent on cars? And why would this hurt so much if our car wasn't available to us? And yeah, I think that's another thing to consider.
Do you think that car dependency is also car policy, like based on zoning and development, and those are all policy decisions on how, you know, how the city has been built and planned. Like car dependency and car culture, I think it's really just car policy.
Yeah. It's the complete design of our city that promotes this particular way of, So you're right, it does get back to policy, because if we designed our cities differently, put in policies in place, you know, so that we didn't have developers benefit so much from building way out in the suburbs, and then, makes it difficult for people to use, you know, not use vehicles. So I think you're right. It does get back to policy, and it gets back to the leadership and what is important to us. I think also the geopolitics right now might be a way, again, talk about opportunities for doing things differently, we're in this situation right now geopolitically and, issues around gas prices, all that. We should really be taking advantage of that and looking at, okay, time to take this seriously and develop infrastructure that doesn't promote car dependency. Again, policy is what's going to make that change. So I think that makes sense. I agree with you.
And just to finish, I think that, yeah, the policy piece is very important. Case in point, London's also a place I normally spend a fair amount of time in, and they made a policy of you even go to a particular neighborhood from center London to somewhere else, well, you pay a tax on your car. And that drove people to start using the tube more. It's not just because of the maintenance of the roads, but again, it was a way of shifting that. And there's a larger question of policy in terms of car manufacturers making built-in redundancies for their vehicles now, but that's another conversation.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
just
Go ahead,
very
Ethan.
quick, we need to create the sense of urgency because in a city like Winnipeg, I'm not very sure that we have a sense of urgency, and it's natural. I mean, if it's convenience and we are a small city, we don't have so many congestion problems, we don't have so many air pollution problems, but we need to look into the future. I mean, some of our other cities like Mexico City and others, we have huge problems all day, congestion, all that we can show on the slides. But the question is this a problem now for this city? Is it going to be a problem? When is going to be the problem? So we need to take advantage of that. Of course, it's more difficult because we don't have the problem just right now. But we need to create this sense of urgency because it's around the corner, actually.
Yeah.
Well, I think in Winnipeg, it's because the city is insolvent. So it might not be like a space or a climate urgency, but there is going to be a municipal finance urgency, within in less than a decade. So I think that might create that sense of urgency. And that's, I think, the reason, if I recall, it's perhaps why Copenhagen has so much cycling, because they faced bankruptcy, and the only reason why they built cycling infrastructure is that's because that's all they could afford.
Okay, great, thanks for that. Yes? I'm not really sure what time we have. Jorge, if you want to let us know.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, it's right behind us. Okay, last question.
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't see you back there.
You were commenting on how we've got all this suburban sprawl, and apparently people want to move out to the suburbs. But are you sure people don't want to live in the city, and they just feel like they're not incentivized to? People don't know any other ways to have life savings other than doing real estate investment, and they don't know how to move around because the sidewalks are so poorly maintained. So I'm not so sure that people, and even if some people want to live in the suburbs, should we be treating them as the most important voice? We don't even have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't be, but it tends to be what happens is that there's more, those folks have more power, right? But does anybody have any comments on that?
Somewhat indirect. What bothers me a little bit about, you talk about a Sage Creek or something like that, all these new development areas. I'm not against people having nice homes and having a good life. That's not it. What bothers me a little bit, and speaks to, I think, what you're saying, is that all those neighborhoods are marketed to first-time homebuyers and young families. That is the issue. It's not, they're not being, the places downtown, which are supposed to be marketed to young professionals like myself, I call myself young still, it's not happening. And again, these sort of really large suburban homes are being marketed, again, to these young families. And I guarantee you there was some, I shouldn't say this, but I'm sure there's some sort of collusion between the property developers in the city saying, okay, what's the maximum mortgage two people can get in the first time? Oh, okay, we're going to price it just out of reach, let them reach for it. So again, we can get those property taxes. And then what's going to happen to those neighborhoods in 10 years when people start defaulting and things like that, instead of building the core up? That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's very accurate. I mean, it's clearly marketed to young families and people. And it's also more affordable to find a place to rent out in those neighborhoods, right? Like people
Sure.
are looking for a place, and I'm not talking about low-income social housing. People are looking for market rent housing, but at a reasonable rate. It's really hard to find that
Yes.
in the core area. And so some people end up going out to those neighborhoods too. So, yeah.
Just very quick. It's very convenient to live like that in some way, but it's not sustainable. And and the second thing is that the worldwide effect on urban development is not based on an equal public policy. It's based on business. So it is not affordable to get a house anywhere in cities because it is a global business that it makes the price higher, and it's creating a financial bubble effect. Not only here, I mean, in everywhere. China, you can see it, it's documented. So we need to end this because it's actually getting very bad effects on how people can not afford house living. So that's maybe the most worst effect on that.
Absolutely. It's not sustainable, but but to the point around it's marketed toward, it's appealing for people, right?
Right.
I mean, they're buying it because it's appealing and it's convenient, and it gives them, sort of, meets their needs in some ways. So unless we have that political leadership, then it'll continue in that way because it's very profitable for developers to build in those areas, more so than building in existing spaces through.
We're electing people who want to live that way.
Yeah.
Sorry?
We're electing people who want to live that way.
Yes, good
Yeah,
point.
it's great, but the thing is, it's not affordable for the city as
Yeah.
well. The services that the city needs to expand, it's very not affordable. So of course it's cheap, but it shouldn't be cheap because actually to
Agreed.
get roads,
Yeah.
to get everything, to get light into the suburban area, it's too expensive.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. But again, it's the short-sightedness of our politicians. They just want to get elected.
That's right.
So they're not really thinking that long-term either, but good point. So I think we're done, eh, Jorge? Should we be winding up? Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. That was our first panel. I think we're planting some pretty nice seeds. What do you think? Of course, I know some of you are going to stick around for the next panel, but please don't go too far because we have a musical performance from Nick Dyson, and he's awesome, and it's going to be really fun. So stick around. Thanks, everybody.